Psalm 27, Le David, of David. Adonai is my light and my victory. From whom shall I feel fright? Adonai is the stronghold of my life. From whom shall I feel terror? When evildoers approach me in battle to feed on my flesh, my pursuers, my adversaries, they have stumbled, they have fallen down. If a camp encamps against me, my heart will not fear. If a war arises against me, in this I would trust. One thing I have sought from Adonai, how I long for it, that I may live in the house of Adonai all the days of my life, that I may look upon the sweetness of Adonai and spend time in the palace, that you might hide me in your sukkah on a chaotic day. Hide me in the hiding places of your tent. Raise me high upon a rock. Now my head rises high above my enemies round about, and in your tent I'll offer offerings to the sound of truah. I shall sing and chant praises to Adonai. Hear, Adonai, my voice. I am crying out. Be gracious to me. Answer me. My heart has said to you, seek my face. I am seeking your face, Adonai. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my help. Do not forsake me. Do not abandon me, God of my deliverance. For my father and mother have abandoned me, yet Adonai gathers me up. Make your path apparent to me. Guide me in the upright road because of those up ahead who lie in wait for me. Do not hand me over to the lust of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, puffing violently. Had I not the faith that I would see the goodness of God in the land of life. Kaveh el Adonai chazak v'ya'amitz libecha, v'kaveh el Adonai. Wait for Adonai. Fill your waiting with hope in Adonai. Let your heart be strong and of good courage, and wait hopefully for Adonai.
I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. That's the way Psalm 27 ends in the translation we customarily use here at Wilshire in Worship, that is the New Revised Standard Version. Translations, you understand, are tricky, especially translations of poetry, where sometimes the choice of a word comes about because of the sound of it that evokes a certain feeling the poet wants to convey, more so than a precise meaning of a word. Now, translating Hebrew poetry is extra challenging, as it's not always just the sound of the word that matters, as the arrangement of letters that is sometimes like an inside joke, right? And then there's the poetic form of Hebrew parallelism, which sounds in us to English more like repetition than rhyme. So sometimes English, this is what I'm really trying to say to you, smooth things out a little bit too much, right? So when Richard Levy translates these same lines from Hebrew that we just heard, had I not the faith that I would see the goodness of God in the land of life, ... He's closer to the original than the more confident translation, I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord. Robert Alter says in his translation notes that this is an ellipsis of sorts. What I would say is it's kind of a dangling thought, a stream of consciousness line that we might not expect in a carefully crafted poem. But then faith is like that, isn't it? It's always, in a way, a dangling assertion against the push and pull of anxiety and despair that could easily overcome us. Sometimes, like the poet, we need to stop and remind ourselves to believe. To believe in the face of our experience, to have faith that God is with us, to have faith that God is among us and will come to our aid. We have to wait upon the Lord with confidence that we are not out here on our own, fending for ourselves against our adversaries, against injustice, against the claim by some that this world is just a random place of forces running amok. This is the worry all human beings deal with, even people of faith. And it was captured enduringly, I think, in the popular play Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. Now, I've never seen it performed, but this week, coming up on this sermon, you might imagine I waded in and read the enigmatic award-winning play that debuted in 1953 as part of the post-World War II theater of the absurd movement. So Beckett resisted any interpretation of the play to make it into a religious work. Nonetheless, anyone who reads it or sees it can see all the biblical allusions to the Gospels, to the Adam and Eve, to Cain and Abel, to signs in the sky, to unlikely prophets bringing messages from the absent Godot that he is always, it seems, coming tomorrow. Tomorrow. But the title, with its play on the names God and Godot, suggests that what constitutes our everyday existence is precisely the question about whether we even should be waiting on God to come to us. The play is 112 pages of dialogue about nothing much. The two central characters, Vladimir and Estragon, remain under a tree where they are told that they should wait for Godot. They talk about things sublime at times and mundane mostly, all the while pondering the meaning of suffering and happiness, the meaning of existence, and all the while they wait for Godot. And all through the play, they wonder if maybe they shouldn't wait, whether they should just get on with it. Stop waiting for the Godot who never comes. Wait for the Lord, the psalmist tells us. And somehow we are drawn into his faith that the wait is worthwhile. The Lord will come at last. The Lord will come to our aid at last. But if we are to wait on the Lord, how do we wait? Do we just bide our time like Vladimir and Estragon, stuck between the past and the future, unable to act in the present? This passive waiting is far from the mind of the psalmist. Biblical faith is faith first of all. Faith, we are not alone. Faith in a God not of our own making. Faith in a God who makes things and makes things happen when it seems all hope is lost. Biblical faith calls us to act. It's an active faith, a partnership with God. Biblical faith is active waiting. But before we plunge headlong into faithful action, I want to say a word about inaction that isn't unfaithful. One kind of faithful inaction is when we refrain from doing violence in the name of peace. We live in a complex and complicated world when there isn't one magic move that we can make in every situation to fix things for good and for good. War is like that. Sometimes we go to war because we believe the violence we do will be less than the violence that would be done if we had not acted. See, this side of the coming of God, peace, like justice, will always be proximate. We await the day when, as Psalm 85 puts it, peace and justice will kiss. But we can do more harm than good when we rush to judgment with guns blazing. There is sometimes a grace in doing nothing, in the words of the ethicist Richard Niebuhr. This kind of nothing, I would say, is not so much inaction as it is a choice of a kind of restraint. That is, it may look passive from the outside. It can seem cowardly, but it takes faith to believe that the end doesn't always justify the means. It takes faith to believe that while it's not all up to God, it's also not all up to us. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread, the poet Alexander Pope said. And faith always takes courage. It's always open-hearted, but it's always also more prudent than reckless. On the other hand, there are times in our lives when passive inaction is about surviving. Our nervous system is programmed to protect us. And when it senses danger, it triggers what's known as the fight or flight instinct. Less well known is the so-called freeze instinct that our bodies employ when they sense that there isn't time for the fight or flight instinct to kick in, when death seems imminent. And you see this in animals who have been caught in their pursuer's jaws or claws. They go limp, they shut down, they play dead. This is also true of human beings who experience severe trauma of any kind. Rape, physical or psychological abuse, betrayal, war, all of these can ignite a kind of freeze response, sending the heart into a protective mode. This self-protective state puts a shield up around the core of the person's heart to keep it beating and to keep the self from being entirely destroyed. It's important to say at this point that God has made us with this instinct, and it is not unfaithful to go into freeze mode for a time. But big-brained humans have a harder time thawing out than our smaller-brained animal cousins. We remember the trauma, even if we can't recall it, even if it's buried deep inside it. It's recorded in a tape that plays on a loop in our subconscious. So one way to understand the call of the psalmist to wait on the Lord with hope is to trust that this process of opening our hearts after a time of freeze is still the direction of healing. If closing our hearts protects us for a time, opening our hearts over time brings needed healing. So let your heart be strong and of good courage, we hear at the end of this psalm. One of our spiritually sensitive members wrote me this week about her experience with Psalm 27, confirming what Rabbi Robbins wrote in her book, saying the practice of opening your heart through meditating on this psalm and waiting for the Lord with hope may offer a little sanctity and maybe sanity to your life. Yes. Now, if we learn to open our hearts, we must say that it will mean more than simply learning to trust again, learning to live again, learning to believe again, even learning to love again. It will mean we grow in our capacity to wait for God and for good. This active waiting will mean that we begin to see openings in the world. And more than that, to see to them. We'll look for places for goodness and kindness and compassion. We'll join God in God's work of goodness. Tyler Perry has gotten a lot of attention this week, and for good reason. He is a hugely successful actor and producer whose work has always spoken in the cadence of the Black experience in what he has called an act of poetic justice, which makes me think of Psalm 27, don't you know? He has just opened Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta. It's a massive undertaking that will foster Black artists who have historically not had the social or financial capacity to own their own work and to direct their own projects as he has. So what makes it poetic justice is that the studios lie on the land of a former Confederate Army base. Here's what he said. The Confederate Army is fighting to keep Negroes enslaved in America, fighting, strategy, planning on this very ground. Now this ground belongs to me. But there's more. Tyler Perry is a committed Christian who himself endured childhood abuse in addition to racial discrimination. And now he's drawing on those experiences to do something else on that new property. You know, the studio's going to be what it is, he said. I'll tell you what I'm most excited about next is pulling the next phase off, is building a compound for trafficked women, girls, homeless women, LGBTQ youth who are put out and displaced somewhere on these 330 acres where they're trained in the business and they become self-sufficient. Go Tyler. This is what open-heartedness looks like. It looks like the goodness of God in the land of the living. That is, it looks like what we would imagine God's dream to be for the world to come, and how it is coming to be in this world now. The harder part, I think, is for those of us who have not had traumatic experiences yet to participate in this same way. Because you see, what Tyler Perry is doing and what so many others do are drawing upon their own painful experiences and learning then to look and see those openings for how they can help and share in the goodness and kindness and compassion of the world. But those of us who haven't had them, when we recognize the privileges we have and join in this anyway, then what we'll see is that Psalm 27 has been doing its work on us too. That is, God has been opening our heart. This itself is evidence of God's presence and goodness. And there's hardly a limit to how much we can do for the world to bring God into view. When we stop protecting ourselves, defending our rights to the life we enjoy, and begin to give our time, our money, and our influence to see the world renewed. The Jews have an oft-repeated phrase for this, tikkun olam, which is to say the repair of the world. The world will not be repaired by doing nothing and waiting on God, as if for Godot. It will also not be repaired only by those who have been hurt and excluded and marginalized, who show compassion for others who are going through that too. It will take all of us doing our part, learning to open our hearts, our calendars, our wallets. And when we stand up for those who are down, when we stand beside those who are alone, and when we speak up for those who are voiceless, God and good come more clearly into view. Our belief that we will see the goodness of God in the land of the living will be confirmed by every act of goodness we share in ourselves. And when we do, we will see the answer to Psalm 27's true longing come true. See, we pray and we work to see the goodness of God. But what our heart really yearns for is to see the good God. And that, more than anything else, is always worth the wait. Amen.